1182. His fingers had already fallen off from the rot. King Baldwin IV of Jerusalem could barely grip his sword, leprosy devouring him alive at 21 years old. Yet, on this scorching morning, this dying monarch, wrapped in silk to hide his decay, lifted onto his horse by attendants, would lead 750 knights against an army that stretched to the horizon. 30,000 of Islam's finest warriors, commanded by the legendary Saladin himself. When Saladin's scouts galloped back with reports that only 750 knights approached their position, the Muslim commanders laughed aloud. A 40-to-1 disadvantage. Military suicide by any calculation. But by sunset on this impossible day, 2,000 Muslim warriors would lie dead in the dust, while the tiny Crusader force remained intact, having achieved what every military manual declared utterly impossible. 3 questions have haunted historians for 8 centuries. How did a force so vastly outnumbered not just survive, but triumph? What revolutionary tactics made Crusader infantry suddenly invincible against the feared Turkish cavalry that had conquered from Egypt to Damascus? And why did winning this miraculous victory actually accelerate the Kingdom of Jerusalem's inevitable destruction? You're about to witness how a terminally ill 21-year-old king used a revolutionary tactical formation to achieve the impossible against odds that should have meant annihilation. Why Saladin's own chroniclers deliberately tried to hide what really happened on this blood-soaked field, and the cruel strategic trap that would ultimately doom the victors despite their seemingly miraculous triumph. The answers involve a secret formation called the Iron Hedgehog that would revolutionize medieval warfare, a controversial decision to strip castle garrisons that should have meant disaster, and a bitter lesson in economic warfare that Saladin would use to systematically destroy the Crusader kingdom just 5 years later. To understand how this impossible victory happened, we must journey back to the scorching summer when a broken truce set the entire Levant ablaze in religious war. The year 1180 had brought exhausted, fragile peace to the Holy Land. A 2-year truce between the Christian kingdom of Jerusalem and Saladin's rapidly growing Ayyubid empire offered both sides desperately needed time to rebuild and regroup. Baldwin IV, the leper king, ruled from Jerusalem despite his body's ongoing betrayal through ravaging disease. At just 19, he'd already proven himself a brilliant tactical mind, but his flesh was failing faster than his kingdom could stabilize. Facing him across the scorched plains stood Saladin, the merciful conqueror who'd systematically united Syria and Egypt under Islamic rule. Where previous Muslim leaders had squabbled endlessly among themselves over territory and prestige, Saladin brought unity, iron discipline, and singular purpose: the reconquest of Jerusalem for Islam. But here's what the pious chronicles deliberately hide beneath their religious language. The real catalyst igniting this war wasn't religious fervor or holy visions, it was pure, naked greed. Reynaud of Châtillon, called the Mad Wolf of Kerak by terrified merchants, controlled the vital trade routes between Damascus and Egypt from his fortress perch at Kerak. Despite the sworn truce, despite oaths made before God, he couldn't resist the glittering caravans passing below his castle walls like golden temptation. In late 1181, Reynaud attacked a massive caravan traveling from Damascus toward Mecca. Among the travelers was Saladin's own sister, traveling under truce protection. The plunder was enormous: 200,000 dinars in goods, enough wealth to fund a small army. When Saladin demanded immediate compensation and the return of all captives as the truce required, Reynaud laughed in the faces of his messengers. "Let your Muhammad come and save them," he supposedly replied with blasphemous contempt. The insult shattered the fragile peace like glass struck by iron. Saladin called for jihad across his empire, summoning warriors from every corner of his domains. By May 1182, an army of 30,000 had gathered at Damascus: regular cavalry, 12,000 mounted archers, volunteer jihadi fighters seeking paradise through holy war, and professional Mamluk slave soldiers who formed Islam's military elite. The Kingdom of Jerusalem faced immediate catastrophe. Baldwin could muster perhaps 1,200 knights from his entire realm at absolute maximum, but most defended isolated castles scattered across a territory stretching from modern Lebanon south to the Red Sea. The kingdom's greatest strength was its network of stone fortresses, but that advantage created fatal weakness. Defending everywhere meant being strong nowhere, spread too thin to concentrate overwhelming force. Then, young Baldwin ordered something that shouldn't have been possible, something that seemed either pure genius or certain suicide: strip the garrisons, leave minimum defenders in the castles, concentrate every available fighting man into one unified field army. It violated every principle of Crusader defensive strategy, built over 80 years. As 30,000 warriors marched toward 750 knights, the stage was set for what should have been simple annihilation. Saladin's host, that emerged from Damascus, defied human comprehension. You must understand what 30,000 men actually looks like to grasp the impossible odds. If they marched in column formation, the army would stretch for over 15 miles. Their daily food consumption equaled a small city's entire supply. The dust cloud from their march could be seen from 20 miles away, a brown stain on the horizon, promising death. The core of Saladin's army consisted of 12,000 mounted archers, Turks, and Kurds who could accurately loose arrows at full gallop with devastating effect. Behind them came 8,000 regular cavalry armed with lances and curved swords. The remaining 10,000 included infantry, engineers hauling siege equipment, and irregular volunteers seeking paradise through jihad. The numbers alone stagger belief. At peak combat, these archers could unleash 30,000 arrows per minute into enemy formations. Each warrior carried 2 composite bows and 60 arrows. The logistics alone represented one of medieval history's greatest military achievements: feeding, moving, and coordinating this massive force. Against this oceanic tide of warriors, Baldwin assembled his pitiful 750 knights and 4,000 infantry scraped from every garrison in the kingdom. But these weren't ordinary soldiers thrown together at random. Each knight represented years of intensive training from childhood, wearing 80 pounds of chainmail armor that cost as much as an entire village's annual production. The infantry, though common-born soldiers, were veterans hardened by constant frontier warfare against raiders. Baldwin himself could barely stand without assistance. Witnesses described in horrified detail how attendants had to physically lift him onto his warhorse, his decaying hands wrapped in silk to hide their corruption. Yet his mind remained sharp as the finest Damascus steel, calculating odds and tactics while his body betrayed him. Beside him rode Raymond III of Tripoli, the kingdom's most experienced military commander, who'd urged desperate caution against stripping the castles bare. Better to lose a few villages than the entire kingdom, he'd warned with grim certainty. But Baldwin had chosen his battleground with careful calculation. Belvoir Castle commanded the Jordan Valley from its hilltop perch, 500 feet above the surrounding plains, controlling the main route from Damascus toward Jerusalem. Its limestone walls rose like judgment itself. Saladin couldn't bypass it without dangerously exposing his supply lines to raids. Then came the calculated psychological warfare designed to break Crusader resolve. Muslim raiders swept systematically through the valley below Belvoir, burning Christian villages with methodical efficiency. From the castle walls, Crusaders watched helpless as smoke pillars rose, where their subjects' homes turned to ash and memory. Each burning village meant catastrophic losses: tax revenue gone, fewer potential recruits, diminished food supplies. Saladin was teaching a brutal lesson in economic warfare that transcended battlefield glory. The Muslim chroniclers deliberately tried to hide this systematic destruction in their accounts. Their sanitized versions gloss over the village burning, but Crusader records preserve the horror in traumatic detail. 60 villages reduced to charred earth in just 3 days. Women and children fleeing desperately to Belvoir's walls, the kingdom bleeding out through 1,000 small economic wounds. But in focusing so intently on economic destruction, Saladin had made a critical miscalculation that would cost him dearly. By concentrating his forces on burning and pillaging rather than immediate assault, he'd given Baldwin precious time to execute his desperate gambit. As Muslim cavalry systematically torched villages, Crusader forces performed something unprecedented in medieval warfare. Infantry and cavalry drilled together intensively in a revolutionary formation that would change how wars were fought forever. Modern military historians still cannot fully explain how they developed and perfected it so quickly under such desperate circumstances. The Iron Hedgehog, a name appearing in Latin chronicles as Arresius Ferreus, represented a complete reimagining of how foot soldiers and mounted knights could work together as one unified weapon. As dawn broke over Belvoir's ancient limestone walls, two armies prepared for a clash that would rewrite the fundamental rules of medieval warfare. Dawn at Belvoir would birth a new kind of combat. As first light painted the castle walls gold, Baldwin's tiny army descended from the heights, moving in perfect, disciplined formation. What Saladin's scouts saw defied every established principle of Crusader tactics they'd studied for decades. Instead of knights charging ahead impetuously with infantry struggling behind, the entire force moved as one living organism. The 750 knights formed the center and rear, while 4,000 infantry created an iron shell completely surrounding them. But this was no simple defensive circle like previous formations. The arrangement bristled with 14-foot pikes held at precise angles. Crossbowmen filled strategic gaps between spearmen. Knights waited like coiled springs inside, ready to countercharge explosively through designated openings. 12,000 arrows darkened the morning sky as Turkish mounted archers unleashed their first devastating volleys. This was standard Islamic tactics perfected over centuries: shower the enemy with arrows while staying beyond reach of their weapons. The tactic had shattered countless Christian armies. But then physics and preparation took over in ways Saladin hadn't anticipated. The Crusader formation raised shields in perfect mechanical unison, creating an overlapping shell like dragon scales. Arrows designed to pierce mail armor at 50 yards lost most of their killing power at the 200-yard range the mounted archers preferred for safety. The ground literally shook beneath thousands of hooves as 8,000 Muslim cavalry prepared for the first probing charge. Their commander, Emir Muzaffar al-Din, had broken Christian armies from Spain to Syria over his long career. He watched intently for gaps in the formation, for signs of panic, for the inevitable moment when discipline cracked under pressure. The first charge hit like thunder made flesh. 500 Mamluks formed the vanguard, the finest heavy cavalry in all of Islam, men who'd never known defeat. They smashed into the Crusader line at full gallop with lances leveled. This is where the impossible happened. Instead of breaking apart like every other formation they'd charged, the infantry line bent backward like a bow absorbing impact. Pike shafts shattered, men screamed in agony, horses reared and bit, but the line held its integrity. Here's the tactical detail that changes everything about this battle. As the Muslim cavalry pulled back to regroup for another charge, crossbow bolts suddenly erupted from the Crusader formation at point-blank range. At 50 yards, a crossbow bolt could punch through mail armor like parchment. In 30 seconds of concentrated fire, 80 Mamluk elite, the best warriors Islam could produce, lay dead or dying. But then Baldwin collapsed mid-command, his disease-ravaged body choosing this critical moment to fail. The sickness devouring his flesh struck with agonizing timing. Witnesses reported him falling from his horse, caught by his personal bodyguard before striking the ground. Yet, even from a litter, unable to stand, the Leper King continued directing the intricate battle. "Hold formation!" he gasped through silk wrappings. "Let them come to us. Patience will kill them." The pattern repeated with brutal efficiency. Muslim charges, the line bending but never breaking, devastating crossbow volleys as attackers withdrew to regroup. What happened in the next 30 seconds would fundamentally change medieval warfare forever. Frustrated by the impenetrable defensive formation, Turkish commanders ordered their specialty tactic, the feigned retreat that had destroyed armies for centuries. 500 cavalry charged again at full speed, but this time they fled after minimal contact, hoping desperately to draw eager knights into fatal pursuit, where they'd be surrounded and slaughtered.